Hi, I'm Soumya Dutta. I'm working with the energy and climate change issues in South Asia for nearly 12-13 years. And in that connection, the international financial institutions in this area, as in many other areas, have played a major role. But their roles have not been properly analyzed in the larger public domain as of now. One area that the IFIs, starting with World Bank, AIIB, and the new kids on the block like the AIIB and the New Development Bank, they are playing a major role now over the last few years in what is called infrastructure. Infrastructure constitutes many areas, even the social infrastructure which is needed for uplifting people above poverty line, giving health services, those are also needed infrastructure. But what we have seen in the last decade or so more and more is the infrastructure investment is going into very expensive, high cost infrastructure like expressways, highways, superfast railways, high tension lines, before that very large mega power plants and ports and connectivity in that sense, which actually do not serve the interest which has the larger sanction of the global Committee of Nations. Like in the UN, the Sustainable Development Goals have been adopted in 2015 September, and from that time onwards it was supposed that the nations which signed into this, which is around 180 nations of the UN member nations, they were supposed to put more emphasis on infrastructure that will attain the Sustainable Development Goals. One of the primary goals is reducing poverty, absolute poverty totally by 2030. The other major goals are providing universal education, water access, universal access to affordable energy, and in these, amongst all these sectors, it seems the international financial institutions have chosen the energy sector and the connectivity in terms of mega highways and mega or high-speed railways. That is the amount, and the ports. These are receiving the maximum investment. But what we are not really pointing out to them in very strong manner is the kind of impact this is having on even retarding the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Like the kind of power infrastructure these IFIs have invested in, are now investing in also, that is having a major impact on the water resources of our countries. And water is a major area where agriculture and attaining SDGs of poverty reduction is a major input. So what is happening as a result of this infrastructure investment is that people who have less resources are getting even less, they are getting deprived of even the resources they had in their commons. So one of the major impacts that is happening is on the commons. The commons are getting more and more privatized. Of course, we know the commons privatization has started with capitalism, but with this new capitalism attack, with the neoliberal financial institutions, these are actually accentuating the capture of commons in very large scale. So one major impact, as I was saying, is on the commons, and these commons actually in our kind of countries support a very large number of people. Like if we see even the apparent achievement of progressive environmental agreements like the Paris Agreement, the commitment of Indian government to sequester carbon to the extent of around 3 gigatons in the next 15 years from 2016 onwards is having an impact on people's common forest lands, common grasslands, grazing lands. So this is, instead of achieving the goal of poverty reduction, this is actually putting people out of their minimal resources, actually increasing the poverty and increasing the inequity. In fact, what we have seen, and there are reports analyzing this, that as a result of this large-scale infrastructure investment by the IFIs, the Gini index, the inequity index, has actually risen amongst all our developing countries, most of our developing countries, and this is very starkly seen in India and neighboring countries, except to some extent in Sri Lanka has not gone through that, but in many other countries this has the impact. The other impact that has happened is because of this large-scale infrastructure, the basic resource of land, water, and the natural resources that many of these communities are dependent on, they are actually now getting more and more under attack because of this very large scale planning. Earlier the planning and the infrastructure investment was based on projects, individual projects. The infrastructure planning today is being done in mega scale. It's not projects. It's entire corridors, entire areas, entire regions. And that is having the impacts on common people, poor people, marginalized people has actually multiplied manifold. So that is one thing that we need to take up. We need to address in very large scale. We need to challenge the IFIs also. And in this situation, why Asia and particularly China, India, Vietnam, Malaysia, these countries are coming into focus, because the Global Infrastructure Outlook report specifically targeted Asian infrastructure need, pending requirements and demands to absurd level, $97 trillion of requirement, $18 trillion plus shortfalls, gaps. This kind of reports have been projected to pave the way for these mega infrastructure investment banks like AIIB to come in, give this investment. The ground is being prepared by these so-called knowledge builders of like the World Bank used to play. Even now they are playing so-called knowledge building role. And as a result, countries' policies and priorities are getting changed. Whereas earlier in India, social infrastructure, poverty reduction were primary goals. Now, getting regions connected with highways is becoming a major goal. And that is actually resulting in extraction of resources from areas where people had some access, and through those resources they could sustain their livelihoods, their minimum living standards. And as a result of this mega connectivity, mega extractivism, these are continuously being sucked away. So we need to bring this up clearly in front of these banks. And the one difference that this new breed of investment banks, infrastructure investment bank, like AIIB, NDB, etc., is that they also do not follow the minimal safeguard standards that World Bank and ADB have built up over decades of resistance. Of course, these safeguards are not the result of World Bank and ADB largesse, but these are results of people's movements. They have fought for this over the last 3 decades. But these new banks like the AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, they don't even have those safeguards. What they are saying that since they are co-financing with the World Bank and ADB kind of financial institutions, their standards will apply. But the reason that these are not applying is also because they are financing through intermediaries. And these intermediaries, which are often national financial institutions, have absolutely no safeguards. And second, you don't know which money is actually going to which area, how much to which project, in many cases. So these are real dangers for the nation. The other problem that I just want to point out is that the present, not only the recent Modi government, but the last 25 years of opening up the Indian economy and the apparent allurement of cheap foreign finance, because we are often said that raising a finance in USA or Europe is much cheaper because of the lower lending rate there, lower interest rate there. India has a much higher interest rate. But what we don't often see is because of the difference of the inflation in these two economies, we often end up taking $1 billion loan, we often end up paying actually $2 billion as the principal amount because of the depreciation of rupee vis-a-vis the other currencies. So actually this is a major burden on the macro Indian economy. It's not only the marginalized people who are suffering, but the entire Indian economy is bearing a burden which is not revealed to us in the beginning. That's why it's extremely important that we address this question. These are often thought of only limited to experts. These are subjects for experts. These are not, because this is everyone's money. Everyone has to understand that their money is being siphoned off by not only their kind of infrastructure, but kind of financial entanglement. And this is not for today or tomorrow or 5 years. For the next 30 to 40 to 50 years, our economy and our people's well-being will be entangled and siphoned. So today is high time that we address these issues. We challenge this infrastructure bank's knowledge development. We develop our own knowledge and we really reach out to people with this understanding so that the government and the IFIs combined actions of sucking resources out of the country, out of people's own livelihood support, along with the corporates, can be resisted, and we can try to build up an alternative vision of development, alternative kind of vision of what infrastructure should mean for a society like India or Bangladesh or Nepal, That is lacking to a large extent, but that's a task that we must understand, that's a challenge we must take. And since the AIIB AGM is taking place in Mumbai, the people's groups, we as a collective of multiple groups, the working group on IFIs, have taken this responsibility to organize the People's Convention on Infrastructure Financing. We must take this opportunity, come together, and I'm appeal to all groups to come together, build our collective understanding and build collective capacity to challenge and build an alternative vision.